hey everyone, I'm just adding this to the beginning of the intro to say that if you don't watch the end of the outro, then you should know that I'm going to stop promoting the Amazon thing where you can buy me books on gender identity using my Amazon wishlist, and then I will read them, and then you will feel happy that you got me a present for my birthday. And on my birthday, maybe on my birthday, although I don't know if I should give away the exact date of my birthday because I feel like that's kind of sensitive information. So around my birthday, which is mid-August, so maybe just, I don't know, 15th of August, whatever. Maybe 20th of August, actually. So that way you'll know it's definitely after my birthday, because my birthday is mid-August, which of course is like from the 10th to the 20th. Yeah, okay, that's a good system. I will open them and say thank you to people. So there you go. That's something you can do. Right. Hello, everybody. So today we are going to be doing part 5 of our reaction to Caelan Conrad's series on how the gender critical movement is apparently a cult. So hope you enjoy. Hopefully we'll make some progress in this video.
You can't begin to trust that it's really your child coming back until the child starts making a choice of clothing, hairstyle, activity that is representative of his or her old style of her.
Oh, no, that's no good. Like, I mean, I don't know but like, if anybody's claiming to be gender critical, and like, this is a book that actually discourages gender nonconformity in kids, then, like, I don't know. Like, I mean, it's not surprising to me that I've literally never heard of this book before from anybody until Caelan Conrad is mentioning it here. But yeah, that is not gender critical belief. I mean, that sounds like Catholic traditionalism, not the gender critical movement.
So your daughter shaving her legs or son not shaving his legs is a sign that they're becoming healthy and happy again, because nothing says happy and healthy.
Oh yeah, because like radical feminists really love when women shave their legs. It's just like they just can't get enough of it.
The conclusion is that conversion therapy does not work, and at best creates temporary results that the parent favors.
That does make sense, because I know when a lot of people tried to use conversion therapy against Keira Bell so that she wouldn't be a lesbian anymore, that failed. So I can agree that actual conversion therapy does seem to fail. The conversion therapy that is going on right now of trying to trans gay men into being trans women and trans lesbians into being trans men. That is a therapy, a conversion therapy that does not work, that causes damage and harm to the children it's inflicted upon, and ultimately many of them are able to resist that and get out of the movement, such as Keira Bell. So there we go. I do agree that conversion therapy does not work.
Causes lifelong trauma to the child subjected to it. There's no boomeranging.
By the way, actually, on the subject of lifelong trauma, I already mentioned Clive Simpson, and a video I was listening to recently basically was talking about how, like, obviously during your formative years in puberty, it's not just your body that develops, your brain develops too. And of course that makes sense, because you think about how a lot of the time kids, it's pretty clear that their brain is not like functioning as an adult brain. Like, I mean, I think we're pretty clear on that. Like, there is this idea that you don't just mature physically, you mature mentally and emotionally. And while part of that is like kind of increased experiences in life, another big part of that is an actual physiological change that happens with puberty. And again, I guess maybe just link in the description to the video itself. But there is, at least based on that, a speculative reason to be concerned that one of the reasons why detransitioners, of course, have so many kind of mental health issues, and one of the reasons why even transitioned trans-identifying people have such obvious mental health issues, is because of the negative effect on their mental development that young, early transition can have. So yes, you are literally causing lifelong trauma to the lesbians that you try to turn into men because of your anti-gay conversion therapy.
But the prospect that all these parents are wrong is never framed by her as even a viable possibility.
Unlike all of the, willing recognition we've had of the idea that people who affirm trans identity might be wrong. I mean, of course, like, here's the thing. If your argument is, like, if you're criticizing somebody for not entertaining the idea that they could be wrong, you've got a problem, because at no point in this video has the idea that trans identity could be wrong been considered for a second. Indeed, it's been desperately avoided as a possibility. So that's kind of interesting. In fact, literally, I think Caelan's literally said, like, I refuse to engage with the question. Like, way back at the beginning, Caelan was like, I'm not going to talk about whether or not trans women are women. I'm not going to talk about whether or not trans men are men. And it's like, okay, so you're refusing to, and very explicitly refusing to engage with the question of whether or not you could be wrong. So if you're going to criticize this person, and again, I have no interest in defending this particular individual, but if you're going to criticize them for that and imply that makes them kind of cult-like, well, you got a problem, because that then turns around on you.
I'll turn off my music so you can go to sleep after you name 5 different genders. Watch this YouTube video about misgendering, or I'll tell everyone at school about how you suck your thumb while you sleep.
So, I mean, pretty obvious that, I genuinely think Caelan might have something wrong with the inability to actually recognize, like, the obvious social function of what people are doing. These are clearly not being presented as actual things that somebody would say. I refuse to believe anybody is genuinely trying to present what was it? Sorry, let's just get it up.
Turn off my music so you can go to sleep after you name 5 different genders.
Okay, yeah, so there we go. There it is. I'll turn off my music so you can go to sleep after you name 5 different genders. Now, like I say, I have been quite consistently showing I have no interest in defending this random Catholic person who I've never heard of. But I am going to say with quite a degree of confidence that even somebody as, I think, presumably boomerish as that is not genuinely trying to pass this off as a serious comment. Maybe this person is literally as ridiculous as Caelan and thinks this should be taken seriously. But I think every single, intelligent, socially intelligent person is reading this and thinking, okay, this isn't actually being presented as something people are sincerely saying. Rather, this is being presented as a hyperbolic, humorous demonstration of the type of nonsense trans-identified people could say. It's like the attack helicopter joke. Like, if somebody quotes the attack helicopter thing, they're not saying a trans-identified person has actually said it. They're presenting it as an example of the kind of stupid thing that a trans-identified person could say based on their logic and attitude. It's that simple. Either way, I think Caelan Conrad, again, seems to have no idea about, the actual intention of words being said, and a worrying, distressing, horrendously sad inability to recognize sarcasm, humor, and of course this actually extends from the fact that Caelan Conrad has insisted on presenting all people who are critical of trans identity as being evil, barely even human, devoid of any emotions besides disgust and fear. So the idea of actually having fun with a funny little goofy quote about naming 5 genders is outside of Caelan's frame of reference for how a gender critical, or rather, let me stress, this person is 100% not gender critical. This person is just critical of trans identity, but they're clearly not gender critical because they're literally talking about affirming gender conformity. But how somebody who is critical of trans identity might behave.
Watch this YouTube video about misgendering, or I'll tell everyone at school about how you suck your thumb while you sleep.
Nobody cares if someone sucks their thumb. I swear to God, this is so out of left field.
I'm not responding.
Caelan Conrad, recognize obvious joke challenge.
Less than a few days in the group, and members are already trying to get me to think my son's gayness was a dysfunction to be removed, even though I had only asked for help with my son being non-binary.
Again, it's worth noting that early on, Caelan Conrad has already admitted that the overwhelming response was people saying that they rejected the homophobia of Caelan's made-up mum character. So like basically is saying, oh, but then this one person directs me to stuff which is like, okay, so one person on one random Facebook group, who cares? Like, genuinely, who cares? Like again, I don't even have to show that the majority of gender critical people do not support homophobic nonsense, because Caelan's already shown that by like the admission of what was spoken about like way back in part 1. So like, I don't know, like, thank you, Caelan, for contradicting your own point. You've really made this easy for me.
The things that I loved and the people I idolized were all deemed girly by society. Makeup, jewelry, skirts, and long hair didn't feel girly to me at all. It just felt like me.
Uh-oh. It's a good thing you weren't raised by TRA parents then, otherwise you might have been taken to a clinic and transed against your will. Oh, that was... like, that's the thing. Like, this is literally an example of why it's a good thing that gender-critical people exist. Gender-critical people who will literally just say, oh, it's a gender non-conforming boy. That's fine. There's no reason to consider that something which could be a medical issue where we need to take them to a therapist to get, potentially at a later point put on puberty blockers and then transitioned. Like, what you're describing is literally something that is better facilitated by the gender-critical point of view. It's me.
There have been many moments in my life where I wondered if I was a trans woman, but learning about gender and its distinction from sex actually made it clear to me that I wasn't, and that I didn't need to be one or the other. Not teaching young people about trans and non-binary identities doesn't prevent anything but a deeper understanding of them.
Sorry. I was a bit late in reaction there because I was kind of processing it, and I just want to say, the claim there is learning that that gender is different from sex was basically helpful for Caelan. But you know who believes that gender is separate from sex? Gender-critical people. Like, if gender refers to gender nonconformity, or rather, gender expression and gender stereotypes, then gender-critical people believe that that is separate from sex. So again, according to Caelan Conrad's own admission, the gender-critical worldview would have perfectly facilitated all of the things that Caelan Conrad is thankful for and thinks were instructive and useful in terms of Caelan Conrad coming to a more complete understanding of who they are. That's interesting, isn't it? It almost seems like actually if Caelan Conrad knew what gender-critical people actually believe, Caelan wouldn't be saying they're these evil, horrible, scary people, but recognizing that actually what they're saying not only makes sense, but is precisely the kind of stuff that Caelan Conrad is saying was needed for a healthy and more kind of emotionally and cognitively complete conception of oneself. Fascinating.
And that leaves only one option for someone assigned male at birth, but who doesn't feel like a man. I'm not saying that.
No, the only option for somebody who's assigned male at birth but doesn't feel like a man is that they're still a man, because feeling like a man is a nonsense concept.
Which gender-critical people would call being groomed. Except, once I had all the information, I understood that my experiences with gender were different from what I was hearing from binary trans people. I was lucky to be able to do this almost 20 years ago and have freely...
Sorry, I like how the implication here is like, oh, I wasn't groomed because I didn't come out as trans or didn't come to see myself as trans. I only came to see myself as non-binary. But non-binary is just as much nonsense, and it's just as much dangerous in terms of how it can be kind of a negative and harmful way to cause children to disassociate from themselves, to gaslight children, and to detach them from their own parents who have their best interests at heart, which is, of course, the way that trans identity functions as a tool for groomers. So the fact that you were convinced you were non-binary is not better. Like, that's the thing. I genuinely like saying, oh, well, guess what? I spoke to trans people and I didn't come to see myself as a trans woman. I just came to see myself as non-binary. That's literally not an improvement at all.
If I had believed there were only two genders or sexes, like gender-critical people preach, who knows what road I would have taken. I'm not going to pull a JK...
But I don't know what you're on about. Like, look, if you believed what gender-critical people believe, then you would have taken the road of, oh, so I'm a biological male, and I can be as gender non-conforming as I like, but ultimately the reality is that the only way it makes sense to understand being a man is as a biological male, so I'm a man. I may be a gender non-conforming man, I may be a gay man, I may be, any different kind of man, because of course there's a huge variety in terms of who a man can be. The only thing that makes somebody a man is being biologically male, and that's not really going to have to be a massive part of your life, so everything else is entirely up to you. Huge amount of diversity, huge amount to go and explore, wonderful, and I would like to think you would have been very happy. I don't see what you're suggesting when you say, who knows what route I would have gone down. I can't see any route where it possibly would have been harmful for you. Whereas I can see many ways in which trans identity could be harmful for many people. That telling people, oh, well, do you feel like a man? Because if you don't feel like a man, then maybe there's something wrong with you. Maybe you need therapy. Maybe you're going to commit suicide. Maybe you need to go on puberty blockers. That's a much more harmful path to go down.
And anyone who claims that educating children about the real world we live in will lead to the fall of society is someone you should have very little trust in.
Okay, so this is the claim I find interesting. Basically, this is arguing that gender-critical people are against educating children about the real world we live in. Now, there are two ways to interpret that statement. So I want to interpret the two possible ways, just so I'm covering all my bases. I'll say up front what the two ways are. The first way would be that it's basically just saying the real world we live in terms of there are people who make this claim. And the second one would be the real world we live in terms of trans identities and non-binary identities are actually valid and actually describe the real world. Just because people believe something, well, the obvious, first of all, that doesn't make it correct. Like, I think we're all pretty clear on that. But the other thing is, it doesn't mean that we should teach it to children. Like, yeah, sometimes we should teach children about stuff. But, obviously, we, for example, might not want to teach children, at least uncritically, that people believe the world is flat. I would say gender-critical people aren't necessarily against teaching children about the reality of trans identity, but they might perhaps want to present it either one, neutrally, I think a lot of gender-critical people would be okay with that, but also negatively and critically, which would still be teaching children about the real world we live in. Like, if by the real world we live in, you just mean that there are people who identify as trans, well, gender-critical people aren't necessarily against teaching children that. So one, even if they were, that wouldn't be a problem because there's many things we don't teach children. It's not hypocritical to not teach children, or not necessarily inappropriate to not teach children about these things, because there are, there's only a limited number of things we can teach children. So of course we're going to have to be discerning in terms of what we actually teach them. But two is that gender critical people aren't necessarily against teaching children about this stuff, because one, like I say, they might say, well, we should teach this neutrally. We can teach children that there are people who believe that they are trans, but let's not teach children that there are people who believe that they're trans and that they're bigots if they don't accept this identity, or that they might have trans identities too, or things like that. Like we can teach children that people believe stuff without teaching them that thing is true. But the other thing is, of course, that we might want to teach children about trans identity with the express purpose of teaching them why it's nonsense and why it's absurd and why it doesn't make any sense. And you'll notice that is still teaching them about the real world we live in. It's still teaching them about people making this claim. It's just also explaining why that claim is nonsense. So this whole idea that gender critical people are against teaching children about the real world we live in terms of a facet of the real world we're living in, being that there are people who identify as trans, seems to be an entirely invalid point. Now, the second possibility is that, like I say, actually we need to teach children that trans identities are valid. And of course, the problem there is that it's simply a claim that hasn't been evidenced. And, kind of the analogy I'd make there is that it would be like a Christian saying, we need to teach kids, like basically saying atheists don't want to teach kids about the real world we live in. With the, I guess, implication being that atheists don't want to teach kids that the Christian theology and the kind of God of the Bible and the, narrative of the Bible is true. And saying, and therefore they're not teaching about the real world we live in. And you can see the issue that the obvious response to that would be, well, why are you saying that's the real world we live in? Like saying you don't want to teach kids about the real world we live in, unless you're talking about something entirely uncontroversial, you have to evidence that you're actually advocating for teaching children about the real world we live in. And I would say this, yes, if you are teaching kids that biological males can be women and that people can be non-binary and that your sex can change and whatever else, then you aren't teaching children about the real world we live in. So overall, I mean, it's a nonsense point no matter how you look at it. And I just thought it was worth pointing out how nonsense it is.
By strictly controlling access to information from outside the cult, you prevent the youth from being able to make informed, consensual decisions about their life and health.
I would like to point something out, okay? So the thing is, this is obviously relating it to being a cult, but one of the things about a cult is that a cult does this to adults as well. A cult is when you start getting adults in hierarchical positions of authority, limiting the kind of availability of information for other adults. So that's the issue. This is not really cult-like. Now, with that said, of course, yes, when you're talking about adults, of course, the gender critical movement does not limit anybody's access to information. I mean, right now, of course, it's literally a joke, isn't it? Because here I am watching this entire video all the way through. If somebody wanted to tune in or go back and watch every single one of these live streams, they would see every single thing that Caelan Conrad has said. Admittedly, a portion of it at 1.5 speed, but I'm sure they can manage that. The reality is people could see everything Caelan has said on my channel. And I'm quite a large gender critical channel, so there you go, point refuted. But yeah, if you're going to say, make the point specific to children, well, sure, maybe people will limit what their children have access to, because that's something parents are able to do. That doesn't make it a cult. But even then, I would ask, well, what actually are parents limiting their children's access to? I would say, again, the problem is that if your kid is on some kind of groomer Discord, yeah, you'll probably want to limit their access to that Discord, but it's disingenuous to act as if that's limiting your child's access to information that will inform them about how the world really is. No, the creepy person DMing them on Discord is not some fount of knowledge that they're missing out on. It's some creepy person who, people shouldn't be allowed to talk to anybody's kids.
And Leela expressed her utter devastation when Leela's parents, upon learning she was gay, yanked Leela from school, confiscated Leela's cell phone, deleted Leela's Facebook profile, and isolated Leela in her bedroom. She was no longer permitted to associate with my son, who shared classes with Leela. My son supported Leela's coming out and was one of the few people who knew about Leela's transgender issues. Leela was always kind and soft-spoken around.
I mean, look, I'm just going to point out the obvious thing that, because I should probably edit this sort of flow a little better, because, the thing was made about, the whole, this all happened when the parents found out that this person was gay, which would seem to imply this was an example of basically, kind of transing away the gay, not from the parents, but I just mean from, society in general, where this was somebody who was previously, a gay male, was for the entirety of their life a gay male, and then later on the whole trans thing happened. But I just wanted to point out to be obviously, no gender critical person would view it as a problem if their child was gay, which is just obvious. This is not an example of a gender critical person. This is an example of somebody who seems to be some sort of traditionalist conservative, which, don't be it literally doesn't matter if your kid's gay. It's just that simple. It does matter if your kid starts talking nonsense about being born in the wrong body, because truth matters objectively. And I suppose I would just say on that note, obviously, it's very sad that this person took their own life, but it's literally as irrelevant as if you told me that a kid took their own life because their parents kept telling them that the earth wasn't flat, and deep down they really knew it was flat, and the government, all the globe manufacturers had been lying, and actually, yeah, literally, I'm just sat there okay, it's sad they killed themselves, but they killed themselves apparently based on their belief in a completely nonsense thing, and that is what it is. Okay. For a minute, the adult children was a bit weird, because I was okay, are they admitting that's what they are?
It's not up for debate whether gender critical ideology has parents isolating and penalizing their children for their gender and sexuality. But what I think...
Wait a minute. No, look, if you're gender critical, again, obviously I've kind of spoken before about how there's a kind of broad definition of gender critical and then a slightly more restricted definition of gender critical. I'm going to stick with the more restrictive definition, because I think that's the most relevant when talking about kind of the gender, like being gender critical as a movement. Because of course, Matt Walsh and J.K. Rowling are not part of the same movement. The radical feminists, kind of liberals, progressives, various people who are concerned about women's sex-based rights and concerned about abolishing or otherwise kind of limiting the relevance of gender stereotypes and, kind of masculinity and femininity as kind of relevant social forces in the world, have no movements that they share with social traditionalists and conservatives, except for maybe one of kind of cynical convenience. Like it might be the case that some conservatives do align themselves with gender critical feminists because they're like, oh, this helps me achieve my limited goals, which, whatever. I mean, we'll see how that works out for them. I hope not particularly well. If you try to penalize or in any way respond negatively to the reality of your child's sexuality, you aren't gender critical. There is no, because of course, the idea that like sexuality is basically just kind of the idea of if you are a man, are you attracted to women or men? And the idea of kind of heteronormativity is an extension of gender. So you can't be gender critical without also being critical of heteronormativity. So obviously it would be completely hypocritical of me as a gender critical person to not expect and to some degree actively discourage my hypothetical, for example, son from engaging with and acting out traditional masculinity, only to then turn around and say, oh, but you have to go and get a girlfriend and be attracted to women because that's what a man is supposed to do. Pretty simple. There is no such thing as a gender critical homophobe, except for maybe allowing for an extreme degree of cognitive dissonance that they need to sort out.
I would have been fine with him being gay, but destroying?
There you go. I would have been fine. So this is an actual gender critical person. I would have been fine with him being gay. The only thing I don't like is him making surgical alterations to his body based on his belief in nonsense.
Now it's all crashing and burning.
So everything isn't crashing and burning. Your child is in fucking med school. They're doing great, making a life as an adult independent from your identity, as all adults must.
Look, at the end of the day, here's the thing, like, in some sense, I'm always dispassionate about these kind of things. So I just like to say, well, they're believing nonsense. That's stupid. I don't usually, but like, considering the emotional investment one would have in their children as a mother, combined with the idea of being presented with a completely incoherent notion of trans identity, and then on top of that, the kind of I think abusive presentation of that often being accompanied with kind of this emotional manipulation and gaslighting. I mean, first of all, I think if you're presenting total nonsense to somebody and insisting it makes sense, I think that's gaslighting in itself. Like, if you are a man, a biological male, saying to a woman that you are a woman, I think that's intrinsically gaslighting. Because, like, you are... Because what is gaslighting? It's kind of convincing somebody that they should believe something which they know not to be true, causing somebody to doubt their own conception of reality. And that's what you're doing when you say to somebody who is a woman because they are biologically female, that in fact, actually, no, being a woman it has nothing to do with being biologically female. It's literally like, we have always been at war with East Asia. Like, oh no, it's just, it's nonsense. So that, and then also kind of the kind of additional level of abuse, which is like, oh, kind of the emotional manipulation of, you are literally killing me by not agreeing with me. You put all of that together and you realize how messed up it is of Caelan Conrad to be making fun of and attacking and judging this woman for the mental state she's currently in. And, would I say that, oh, it's a bit kind of, like emotional to say, everything's crashing and burning because I just like to sit on my, on my little chair and just make fun of trans identity from a distance. and be very dispassionate about it. But yeah, if this was actually something you're experiencing firsthand, yeah, that's really gonna be a difficult thing to deal with. And it's just, yeah, it's really gross for Caelan to make fun of that.
Your adult child is setting boundaries about their body and your language, and you're refusing to respect.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that whole thing about treating, like, they treat mums like servants. Like, no, like, you don't have to kowtow to every single thing your kid says. Like, if your kid is saying that you're being sick because all you're doing is continuing to be attached to reality, then you don't need to take a hint. Your kid needs to sort out the nonsense in their head. It's not the job of mums to be servants to their kids in any way. Never mind going along with even that which is obviously not true. Like, if your kid tells you something that's not true, it's not your job to believe them and say that it's true.
That one's fair. You should feel like garbage for being a liberal. Real left is best, Mama D.
Look, I mean, I don't care, but this person's a liberal. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say every single trans-affirming person is a liberal. Marx wouldn't stand for this stuff. My boy Stalin and Mao wouldn't stand for this stuff. It's just like these people, like, basically, I feel like these people conflate being kind of anti-liberal with being performatively communists. But they're not. They're not actually communists. Indeed, I would always tend to suspect most likely funded by some kind of, at least indirectly, anti-communist interest, because it's very good to present to kids the kind of the people who are watching kind of BreadTube, this vision of communism and anti-capitalism that literally has no substance to it except for arguing over kind of ideological notions, idealism, definitions, the idea that you are whatever you say you are in your head, all that kind of stuff. And of course, moving away from material reality. There are, I mean, again, and I always go back to this fact because I just find it really funny. Yes, there are gender critical people who are libs. But if you want to talk about like somebody who is very prominent as a gender critical person and also very prominent as a lib, J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling is a massive lib, and she's also very prominent as a gender critical person. And as I always like to point out, by J.K. Rowling's own admission, the person who piqued her was Magdalen Burns. And Magdalen Burns was a socialist who came from a long line, or at least some line. Her parents were socialist organizers. She was an activist for the Socialist Labour Party. So it shows you how, while yes, there are a growing number of kind of middle-class, J.K. Rowling-esque libs and Blairites who are becoming gender critical, the ideological core of this movement is a leftist, kind of Marxist-aligned one. And of course, yeah, like when you think about like the radical feminists as well, I'm kind of using kind of socialist Marxist these terms a little bit broadly, but like, yeah, radical feminism and kind of Marxist feminists have always been pretty buddy-buddy. This is not a liberal movement at its core, but yes, it does kind of appeal to liberals and indeed conservatives and indeed many other people for a variety of reasons, but I guess foremost among them is that it's obviously true.
I wish I could just snap my fingers and feel good about affirming his gender choice. Non-binary with feminization.
I kind of find it funny how I like do these breakdowns to actual like TRAs who are out there giving the best arguments they can for their position and like making 5.5-hour series that are supposed to be showing how the gender critical movement is a whole. And meanwhile, this person's doing the exact same thing. They're doing it. They're doing a line by line breakdown to something. And is it a response to something a gender critical person, like an actual kind of gender critical personality, has put out there to argue their case? Nope. Is it a response to one of my videos where I've actually countered many of Caelan Conrad's points? Nope. It's a response to some random mum on Facebook.
Did you, for a second, even mention how your child is doing with all this? How they are feeling about their transition? Of course you didn't. Why would you?
Why are you saying that, like, There was no consideration about how they're feeling. You're just kind of inserting that from nowhere. And again, it feels like really kind of, it's just so messed up that like somebody is venting about their feelings and your immediate response is jumping to go, yeah, did you think about how other people are thinking? It's like that's just so weird to me. Like, if someone's talking about their feelings, let them talk about their feelings. Like, I would be genuinely really scared if this was how somebody reacted to, like, let's say their intimate partner talking about, like, something that bothered them. Like, their intimate partner's talking about something that bothers them, and they say, yeah, but did you think about how anyone else feels in this? It's like, for goodness sake, let people just talk about how they're feeling. Like, you're such a hypocrite because you're the one, like, being dismissive of, like, here's the thing. If a trans-identified person came out and said all of this stuff about their mum, you wouldn't be there saying, but did you think about how they're feeling? Did you think about how your mum's feeling? You wouldn't say that. So you're literally just being a hypocrite here. Like, if you're attacking the mum for apparently not paying sufficient consideration to how the child is thinking, but you're not attacking the child for, I would imagine, perhaps complaining to all the groomer buddies on Discord about how, you know, the mum isn't affirming them, and I bet they're not considering how the mum feels.
I remember in my innocent early days as Carol Marinara reading this post and thinking, holy crap, they're gonna eat this batshit mom up in the comments.
Why do you think that? Why would they? It's why? What are you on about? I don't get it. The only time that you showed somebody in one of these Facebook groups being critical of one of the parents is when that parent was homophobic. And by the way, now I'm remembering, the parent in question was you pretending to be a homophobic gender critical parent because I guess you couldn't find any actual examples. And yeah, apparently then you came across an example of a parent who, let me remind everyone, has already said she would have been fine with her son being gay, so she wasn't homophobic. The only thing she's critical of is the trans identity, which of course, why would anybody have a problem? Why would anybody in a gender critical group eat somebody up for being against trans identity?
Like, even for concerned parents, seeing your child transitioning disgust you is pretty f***ed up.
What? What are you on about? You've literally, one of the central theses of this video has been that the gender critical movement is motivated by disgust. How can you simultaneously have made an entire video like, oh yeah, the gender critical movement is full of disgust, and then be like, oh, but they would have been against this woman because she was disgusted? I don't understand the logic there.
Lots of people are grossed out by different things, and it's not a big deal. I told him how much I don't like back hair and how most men that...
This is a good attitude. Yeah, like, teach your kid that actually being uncomfortable with some aspects of your body is it is a problem, but it's something that is normal. It's something that other people deal with. And the healthy reaction is not to decide that you need to rewrite your entire conception of reality and start believing in nonsense claims just to help you with your mental health issues about your perception of your own body.
Maybe your visceral disgust in the femininity of men is exactly why it feels like it's coming out of the blue, with a rapid onset, if you will. Because they didn't feel safe telling you.
When did they say that they were disgusted by the femininity of men? They said they were disgusted with the idea of somebody getting inalterable surgery to their body. They didn't say the idea of a man being feminine is disgusting to them. You know, I'm pretty sure if you, like, I bet this mom was into some David Bowie back in her day. I reckon so. He's pretty feminine presenting. Like, I don't believe that this mom is, like, just against... And again, if she was, then she would be gender critical. Because, of course, a gender critical person, unless you're talking about, like, kind of so much imitating femininity that it becomes a bit like kind of cultural appropriation, where you say, is it appropriate for somebody who is kind of a beneficiary of patriarchal oppression, a man, to be imitating somebody who is a victim of patriarchal oppression, a woman? You could have that argument. But in terms of just like more just like aesthetic choices when it comes to femininity, I don't think most people have a problem with that at all, and certainly no gender critical people. Oh yeah, someone's pointing out. She said she doesn't like back hair. Black hair. She doesn't like back hair on men. Body hair is matches. So yeah, this woman obviously already supports something that's kind of feminine. Like if a guy is shaving his back hair, that's a pretty feminine thing to do. And yeah, people are pointing out this person is just unambiguously a mum hater, and I definitely agree with that.
You don't get to blame us for masking ourselves to hide from your vitriol and invalidation, and then use your memories of that mask as evidence that it's our real face. No.
I mean, look, let's be clear. The reason why trans identity is nonsense is not because you can conclude somebody's trans identity is inauthentic because they didn't previously seem to act in a way that made you think they would identify as trans. The reason it's nonsense is because it's nonsense. The reason it's inauthentic is because nobody is authentically trans. Nobody is authentically a biological male who's a woman. It's like, even if there is precedent, so what? It's like, oh, well, there was precedent. Like, if there was precedent that your kid was going to believe the earth is flat, that doesn't mean the earth is flat. It's that simple.
Being a trans kid and having your parents try and gaslight you out of your own memory of events is incredibly fucked up.
I like how you're getting the gaslight thing here, but I would say, like, you're not gaslighting somebody by saying, look, you literally were noticeably happy and, like, looking like you were content with your life. That's not gaslighting, that's pointing out the obvious reality. It's, if anything, more gaslighting to say, no, actually, even while I was giving fully the impression of being happy and content, I was miserable the whole time, and you now need to accept a completely different narrative of how I was. That's gaslighting. Like, I don't understand. It's literally, like, why does Caelan always say the opposite to what's actually true?
They don't see their children as...
Who is this being aimed at? Well, let me tell you, this is being aimed at some random Facebook person who we've been, I think, in the process of hearing Caelan epic style debunk for the past half an hour, it feels like. Genuinely just
like, this is where this ideology leads. If you just sit in it and think for more than a second, how is it possible?
Okay, I suppose I should respond to the whole, like, well, what if something actually bad has happened and you're smiling to conceal the fact that something bad has happened? Here's the thing, okay? In that situation, you can very clearly explain why it is that there was a confusion. Like, you can say, no, actually, I was smiling because I was in the presence of somebody who was harming me, and I didn't want to make it obvious because I was afraid to let people know. And I'm not saying, like, oh, if somebody smiles in a photo, that means they were definitely happy, and they're definitely wrong to say they weren't. What I'm saying is, it's quite a reasonable objection, especially to somebody who's just offering a nebulous kind of comment about, oh, I just wasn't happy because I wasn't being my true self, to point to the record of them consistently behaving happy and seeming to be content, and arguing, hold on a minute, 1 minute you go from seeming happy all the time to next thing you're telling me I need to believe something totally nonsense or else you're going to end your own life. That's a pretty reasonable response, and it's kind of gaslighting for the person to say, who's literally telling you, you've got to believe the nonsense I'm telling you or else I'm going to kill myself. Oh, I've always been like this whole time. This is just me finally being who I've been all along. That's far more like gaslighting. And I mean, apart from anything else, it's a reasonable question to ask, simply to try and understand, right? Like, even if you're not presenting it as like, you're wrong, you're just presenting, well, how do you explain this? You're saying, oh, you've literally been something else this whole time and it's been like painful for you to disguise it and stuff like that. And it's like, really? Because it seems like you were fine, and now it almost as if there's some kind of confirmation bias going on where you've actually been fed into the, you've seen this idea and you've bought into it, and it's kind of just snowballed into this thing that's become an increasing obsession for you. Bearing in mind, if we're talking about kids, there's a chance, like we're talking about trans kids, there's a chance this is already a kid who has potentially some kind of like mild mental health issues apart from that anyway, like a lot of, obviously autism is a classic example. But yeah, it seems like this has become a point of obsession for you, and now, suddenly, out of nowhere, you're telling me that you're about to end your own life. How do you explain that? How do you explain why my narrative of you were fine, suddenly you bought into a nonsense idea, became obsessed with it, and have now been fed a script that's telling you, because of course we know that talking about trans suicide increases instances of suicidal ideation. That talking about suicide in general and kind of constantly, like basically telling people that they're likely to commit suicide will make people more likely to commit suicide. This is an observed phenomenon. So with that said, that would seem to be a much more obvious narrative for why you're now telling me you're going to kill yourself unless I start agreeing with everything you say, than your narrative of actually you've just been perfectly hiding this thing the whole time and you've known it all along.
Trust your gut. Your kid won't actually kill himself.
Yeah, someone's already pointed out, like, this was like a while ago, like I think it was back in part 2, but there was this whole trust your gut thing, even though I've never known any gender critical person who has said trust your gut before. Like, I've literally, like, this is not a phrase in the movement. Like, I've never said trust your gut. I don't know if anyone else has ever said trust your gut, but yeah, they're really leaning into it, which is fun.
When the children all return home and tell their parents they were right all along. It's coming, they say, like Trump's eventual return to office, all the vaccinated suckers dying, the return of Jesus himself, when the righteous shall be lifted into heaven. Everyone who hangs out on the fringe of reason and science thinks they are going to be proven to be right eventually. That all of this won't have been for nothing, and that'll show us. Everyone who doubts.
I mean, look, okay, here's the thing. So I remember seeing like somebody else mention this, of like the whole thing of like, well, gender critical people are a cult because they believe in the idea that like eventually things like kind of the second coming narrative of like, eventually something will happen which will prove that we're all right. You know, I mean, it reminds me of when like I saw a Muslim one time be like, I can't wait until Jesus shows up and says Islam is true, which, you know, good luck with that. But like the thing is, obviously, it's again another example of where you can't just, like, the difference between a cult and any other belief-oriented movement is going to be about a matter of degrees, right? Like, because lots of different movements are going to try to recruit people. So if you want to say what makes that movement a cult, you can't just say it's that they try to recruit people. You need to show what it is about how they're trying to recruit people that's cult-like, so on and so forth. If you're going to say that a movement reinforces each other's beliefs, well, every single movement reinforces each other's beliefs. So you're going to have to show that they're reinforcing each other in a uniquely cult-like way. And in the exact same sense, a lot of movements do believe, you know, that actually they are going to be successful, that they will be vindicated by the kind of, what is it, like the long arc of history or whatever Obama talked about. Like, the whole phrase, like the right side of history, is a very common phrase, and it's a phrase not just reserved for cults. And the thing is, you know, like conversely, I mean, we have the term black pill to describe people who actually believe that it's hopeless, that their movement isn't going to succeed. And that's actually considered quite a kind of niche part of a movement. Like if you are black pilled, that's actually considered quite rare, because the alternative is actually just to be kind of normal, just to believe that, yeah, of course, what you believe will ultimately be successful. So the point is, it's not enough. I mean, it's a really simple point, but it's not enough to just show that gender critical people believe they will be vindicated by history or by the future, that eventually the future will result in a situation where people recognize that trans identity is nonsense and that gender critical people are viewed as having been on the right side of history. It's not enough to claim that because they believe that, they're therefore similar to, you know, whatever kind of doomsday cult or anything like that. Because why would you say that rather than saying they're similar to the innumerable socialists and, you know, kind of communists, funny face to pause on, by the way, who, who believe, of course, as Marx literally said, that eventually communism is going to be like the final kind of completely, you know, like the kind of final economic model. I mean, I know Caelan Conrad's only a pretend communist and pretend socialist and is actually deep down a liberal shill, but if you're going to pretend to be a socialist or communist, you might think that you would have to at least consider the fact that socialism and communism, like literally in one of Caelan Conrad's previous videos, there was a picture of Marx in a framed picture in the background. And it's like, do you not realize that Marx literally taught that there is a progression of different economic systems which will ultimately end in communism? So is communism a cult? Or is it just like a lot of movements saying, hey, you know what, eventually we'll be right? Because that's what a lot of movements do. You know what, I'm going to bet back in like the 18th century, the kind of slavery abolitionists believe that they would be proven correct and that eventually slavery would be abolished. And you know what? They were right. They weren't crazy cult members. They were people who were championing a righteous cause and were correct, and were proven correct by history, as indeed has happened at many times throughout history. I'm sure I can find, I mean, what about MLK, right? He says he has a dream of like one day when people won't be judged by the color of their skin. Or a crazy cult leader, MLK, believing in the doomsday prophetic time when suddenly he'll be proven right. Like, that's the thing. It's just very stupid. Almost every single person on at least some of their beliefs believes that they will be proven correct. And that doesn't make it a cult. I mean, it doesn't even, like, even for religious beliefs, not all religions are cults. So it's kind of like, even then it's dumb.
That'll show all of us, won't it? I don't believe that's going to happen. But after all of this time with these...
Hold on. Hold on a minute. So you don't believe that's going to happen? So are you saying that you believe that actually your movement will be proven correct by history? That your movement will be vindicated? That your movement will be the one that is looked back on as the correct one? So I guess you must be a part of a cult then. Because that's the logic you were presenting. Like, that's the issue, see? Everybody believes that they will ultimately be proven to be correct.
I wonder how culpability will be met out when it's all said and done, when this blatantly fringe bias...
Okay, this is interesting. The claim is, how will culpability... Because I actually spoke about this before. I mean, I literally... Again, I used my favorite phrase, the Nuremberg trials of public opinion. Like, when it's revealed that trans identity is not... Because here's the thing, you'll notice we're basically saying the same thing. Interestingly, I think Caelan Conrad would accuse me of being cult-like for basically just saying the exact same thing Caelan's saying, but in reverse. Because I agree with Caelan that I think that yes, actually there will be a moment where the people who disagree with me will be held to account. They will be held culpable. They will be viewed negatively, and they will be like, in some sense punished for the actions they've done. So I am saying all the exact same things Caelan is saying. I think that Judith Butler will go down as a monster, just as like, I mean, the funny thing is, this has literally already happened. I mean, the person who coined the phrase gender identity was John Money. And already, admittedly, it took, until even in the 1990s, John Money was still being praised as a wonderful, fantastic person. But nowadays, even the TRAs are rejecting John Money, saying they don't want anything to do with John Money. So the funny thing is, I mean, I'll say this, even if, like John Money, it ends up that these people are rejected by the TRAs of the future, I think these people will still be rejected. Like, maybe in the future, it will be like, oh yeah, we knew that puberty blockers were bad, but that's not really what the trans movement is about. Just like apparently the trans movement wasn't about John Money, even though he started it. Like, that's kind of the thing. These people might move the goalposts, but I think no matter what, the people right now pushing out the worst of this stuff will be, and yeah, someone's mentioning Tavistock, which is of course an interesting, relevant thing here. Like, Tavistock has got in trouble for their abuse of children. It's so fascinating, isn't it? It's so interesting that actually we're both saying the same thing. Caelan Conrad saying, well, how will the gender critical people be held to account when all of the evil they've done is revealed? And I'm basically saying the same thing. The interesting thing is I actually have a precedent for saying that, because there have been TRAs who have been held to account, like John Money. I mean, not, again, literally just in kind of the, like I say, trial or the court of public opinion. But, obviously now it's happening with Tavistock. It's happening with Stonewall, right? Like, thanks to the Alison Bailey ruling, you're not going to get organizations wanting to sign up to Stonewall's diversity scheme anymore, because Stonewall will get off scot-free, and meanwhile they'll be faced having to, foot the bill. Like, they're going to get an annoying kind of legal battle where it will be found that they were discriminatory. That's not good. So yeah, we have more of a basis to make these claims.
If I were an anti-trans icon, I wouldn't be scared of the gender industry. I'd be scared of the people I led to believe I was qualified enough to tell them how to treat their child's gender dysphoria.
I mean, first of all, I don't think I've said very much about how to treat your kid's gender dysphoria. apart from just vaguely saying that some of the stuff that's been mentioned here sounds good. Yeah, this is all pretty intense. I will say, would I call myself an anti-trans icon? Well, I don't know. Icon's a pretty strong word. But I think when it comes to challenging trans identity, I prefer to think of myself as an iconoclast. But with that said, I'm obviously somebody with somewhat of a platform, the kind of person who can Google my name and see some people saying some things, the kind of person who will occasionally get mentioned on the ContraPoint subreddit. I'm someone who makes some waves, and I will say that I've never once thought to myself that what I have to worry about is the people I like, who watch my videos saying, oh God, he was lying to me this whole time. He was manipulating me by showing me everything the opposite side was saying and responding to it. Like, I don't know. It would be pretty, I would say honestly, like if I've managed to manipulate anybody by literally showing them everything that these people are saying, then I almost feel like that's so impressive that you should be impressed. Because like usually, if you want to manipulate someone, you want to shut them off from alternative ideas. I've somehow managed to manipulate people principally by just telling them or showing them what the other side has been saying, which is pretty funny.
Well, guess what? You're not trans and you're doing a whole lot of yapping.
Women yapping. Those damn women. Always yapping, always running their mouth, Caelan? Alright everyone, so that was the end of part 5. There was no amazing point in the video that meant I had to redo the outro. Because I'm recording this in advance, and I can guarantee right now, even though I'm recording this before I've actually watched any of the content that's going to make it into the edited part 5, that none of it was good and none of it changed my mind. How's that for being open to new ideas? Anyway, so I hope you do like, share, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. Let me know what you think, etc., etc. Want to go on Patreon? That's cool. Want to go on PayPal? That's cool. I feel like we're probably coming up on the end of like the period where I can kind of reasonably be promoting the Amazon stuff anymore. Like, let's be real. If you haven't done it yet, then you're not going to do it. But you might do it now. Now that I've said that, now I've kind of added this sense of finality to it. Like, this is the last time I'm going to promote it. Maybe I should have mentioned it in the intro, actually. Just in case people weren't aware. Because some people just don't know. Like, I feel like some people just don't watch all the way to the outro because they think it's too long and rambly. But, like, if I did include it, let's do it now. Okay, there we go. Just added that into the intro. Really good job, me. And apart from that, I'll just say thank you to my current patrons.